Now, my friend Jasper and I enjoy hunting. We head into the wilderness every chance that we can get, on weekends mostly. He's the talkative one. I guess that makes sense because he's a car salesman. I'm a school teacher, so we usually have a lot to talk about. The differences keep things interesting. The wooded area around my town is pretty extensive. It's riddled with little caves, most of them fairly small. There are so many trees it's easy to get disoriented, or accidentally shoot someone. Jasper's still sore about the incident from a few years back. But what we're really reeling from is our most recent trip. Jasper seems excited, said he had a good feeling about this weekend. Of course, he sold a few cars that week, so he couldn't help but be in a good mood. We took off for the woods that Friday, both eager to get away from our quaint suburban lives. On the drive out of town, Jasper tapped me on the shoulder. "I got a good feeling about this weekend, Miles. I think I might achieve the much coveted threefer. What do you think? Or are we going to come out of the woods soaked and empty-handed?" Jasper always looked to me for a reality check before we went hunting. I just shook my head. "I don't know, Jasper. Actually, I'm not getting a good reading either way. Neutral." "Neutral, huh? Maybe I'll bag one buck and then half of another one. Not bad. I can live with that. Mainly it's about getting away. You know that. Cindy and I are having problems." "You two will work things out. You always do," I replied, forcing my tone to be light. I hoped my reading of the situation was wrong, and that Jasper would achieve this threefer. Part of me wondered how he could talk like that and somehow manage to get himself a wife, but I never gave my curiosity a voice. From there, the drive wasn't very long. Well, just long enough that we had the impression we were far away from the pressure of our humdrum lives, like always. Out here in the wilderness, I had a new appreciation for Jasper's moral internal compass. He didn't care about the moral implications of hunting. He just wanted to enjoy the weekend. I did too. Sarah and I were doing just fine. Well, we would be doing better if James, our son, wasn't having behavioral problems. He had always come back late, and Sarah expressed concern many times over the kind of friends he spent time with. I earned a reprimand from her about going on this trip. She said that James was reacting to me being gone all the time, which wasn't fair, I retorted. Sure, I went hunting with Jasper on many weekends, but not all of them. And every time I tried to spend a day with James, he acted embarrassed by me. Honestly, these hunting trips were the only thing keeping me sane. Jasper didn't talk that much about his wife either, but from what he allowed himself to say, his home life wasn't very pleasant. And I knew from experience that underneath Jasper's supposedly good moods lurked a current of discontent. He seemed so excited for this weekend, which told me something was wrong. Everything proceeded like usual. We drove to our preferred camping spot, got out our gear, and then we set everything up. There wouldn't be much hunting for the rest of the day because there wasn't much of it left. Jasper could gather firewood like nobody's business, so I fished out a can of beans from the backpack of snacks that we brought with us. It was tradition. The woods had a creepy feel as evening approached. I found Jasper's talk about the much coveted threefer less and less soothing as we ate our beans, which cooked slowly over the crackling fire. Jasper nodded off in his sleeping bag around 10:15. I watched as the ghostly rays of moonlight shone through the branches. I wasn't ready to go to sleep right at that moment, so I opened the backpack of snacks James was responsible for and I rooted through it. My hand brushed against something metal. I hastily pulled it out. What the? I whispered, and Jasper muttered something, turning over in his sleeping bag. I took the trinket close to the fire so I could see it more clearly. Bright orange flame reflected off the glossy black amulet, which had a silver skull placed in the middle. I wondered if this belonged to my son James, as he had a gothic sensibility about him. James, what am I going to do with you? I asked the woods. The impatient hooting of an owl answered back. I went back to my sleeping bag, bringing out a mystery book that I always took with me on trips. Usually, I could polish off a mystery in a few weeks, as I saved them specifically for these trips. I must have nodded off while reading, because I was startled awake by Jasper's voice. He said something about seeing the biggest buck in his whole life. "Grab your rifle," he yelled back at me, and I struggled out of my sleeping bag and I grabbed the rifle, the backpack too. I never went into the woods without that. When I was younger, out hunting with Dad, I got lost in the woods for hours. The fear of starving to death from a food shortage or dehydration had been seared into my brain. I followed Jasper's hulk of a frame, close enough anyway, and seemed to lose him at the foot of a stream. Putting the rifle strap over my shoulder, I gazed around and then fished for the flashlight of my backpack. Once I found it, I shone it in every direction until I spotted the jagged mouth of a cave in the center of a large hill. I would have to climb the sides of the stream about 30 feet to reach it, and I wasn't even sure that I would fit through. Well, I did manage to squirm my way into the cave, the smell of bat droppings instantly reaching my nostrils. I picked up the flashlight which had fallen from my hand as I made my way past the opening. "James?" I whispered, not wanting to disturb the bats too much. I heard a shout, not a direct response to what I said necessarily, and I did my best to run towards the sound. The cave tunnel twisted and turned, narrowing enough that it stimulated my claustrophobia. The smell of bat droppings only increased as I went deeper into the cave. Eventually, I glimpsed an opening several feet ahead, this one a bit smaller than the entrance, and this exit looked almost key-shaped. There was no sign of Jasper, so I attempted to climb through the exit. My foot became stuck on some jagged rock. Just as I was able to free it, I tumbled out and felt my phone vibrating in my pants pocket. I lay, stunned on the ground for a minute, and then sat up. I could barely see 2 feet in front of me because the flashlight had fallen in front of me and turned to the side. "Dang, Miles, where the heck are we? You okay?" I heard the sound of Jasper's voice, uncharacteristically thin as a random wind began to blow. "Yeah, I'm alright. Ankle hurts a bit, but I don't think it's sprained." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. There was a text from Sarah, except it looked like it had been cut off. "There's something wrong with Both Jasper and James started with J, so I wasn't quite sure who she was referring to. Most likely since she really talked to Jasper aside from random small talk before our trips. This meant James. But what could possibly be wrong with him? I sent a text back, wondering if it would go through all the way in the middle of nowhere, but I received a partial text, so maybe something would go through. I stared in front of me, completely confused as the cave opening I emerged from apparently didn't exist anymore. For a few more minutes, I stared and tried to comprehend my situation. Once I recovered my wits, I went to where Jasper stood at the edge of a crescent of trees. He seemed to be staring blankly off into the distance. "And now see where the ground takes a tip next to those large rocks. I think we've been there before. Let's head in that direction," Jasper said. The thing was, Jasper had significant charisma but a poor sense of direction. I'd follow him to hell and back, and he would still probably convince me he made the right decision. So we headed into the crescent of trees, populated by all sorts of woodland critters. My anxiety started to increase as we seemed to be going in circles, and I kept checking my watch. The sun should have risen already, Jasper muttered. More hours passed. Okay, something's messed up. It says 10:30 a.m. on my watch and it still looks like midnight. Jasper continued. I nodded. I'm starting to get a little spooked, honestly, I said. Where the heck are we? Jasper didn't answer. We walked in silence for a long time. Days. Without the sun, seconds, minutes, hours, time itself became irrelevant. I began to walk ahead of Jasper, scanning the environment for any signs of familiarity with the campsite, but I didn't find any. Instead, I stopped just short of a clearing, watching as a deer tore into the bloodied carcass of a squirrel. The deer had fangs, a cluster of murky eyes and short, black antlers that were bent at odd angles. I held up a hand to Jasper. He halted, following my gaze. The clouded eyes of the deer were fixed in us now, aware of our presence as it looked as if it was sucking the blood from the squirrel's tiny head. I watched in horror as it continued the process, almost daring me to intervene with its hateful stare. All of a sudden, it lunged at us, all eyes focused on me. Jasper tried to fire his rifle at the thing, but it didn't work. Thinking furiously, I took the amulet from my pocket and held it in front of me. The beast stopped in its tracks, growling, the squirrel's blood dripping from its serrated teeth. It backed away, its hooves oddly silent against the dead leaves. Growling a few more times, it turned in the opposite direction and fled into the woods. Jasper asked if I was okay, and I stood up shakily, responding as best I could. We wandered the wilderness some more. Jasper had gone up ahead, so by the time that I caught up to him, he was next to a pond filled with black ooze. I saw him talking to a man in black robes. He had a scar on his left cheek and seemed very familiar. One of the man's eyes looked completely mangled, and it took me a moment to realize that he had a paleness of a corpse. As I approached a few more feet, his expression became more alert and he took off, fleeing with the grace of a woodland creature. Jasper turned to face me. Miles, I know the way out of here. The man in the robes told me, but I have a confession to make. That amulet you found in your backpack, it's mine. Except until now, I didn't know who put it there. Who put it there? I asked, a tone flat, anger boiling underneath. Your son. See, how he just explained it to me is that I told him about my lucky talisman, the amulet. I use it when I need a lucky week. It doesn't work all the times, but sometimes. I mean, I figured it was mostly superstition at work. I guess I was wrong. Anyway, he must have stolen it from me and placed it in your backpack. Not sure how that translated into us finding ourselves here. Look, Miles, James said that he just wanted to spend time with you, and this was the only way. He realized that he went too far and he showed me the way out. I didn't say anything after that. Knowing James as I knew him, I wasn't sure if I bought that. According to Jasper, James realized he carried things too far and appeared here to show us the way out. There is a cave not too far from the pond and we entered it, following the twisting, arduous tunnels to the exit. I was ecstatic to see the sun, especially the campsite. Everything was illuminated in the early morning light, and Jasper appeared just as thrilled as me to be back from wherever we were. We packed everything up and we began the drive home. Jasper lamented that he hadn't achieved his threefer as a clumsy attempt to return to a vague normalcy, but it didn't work. We fell silent and we didn't talk much the rest of the way. At home, after dropping Jasper off, I went inside and greeted everyone. James was cool to me, if seemingly repentant. His eyes were darting back and forth, probably wondering whether or not I would say anything. I chose not to because Sarah and James had already fought about something the week before, and they were still recovering from that. Later, James asked to see me in his room. He said he was sorry for what he did, and that he didn't mean to cause me harm or anything like that. It was just an innocent prank, he claimed, inspired by what his friend Bobby suggested. Apparently Bobby saw real power in the amulet. Jasper requested it back, of course, so I wasn't worried about him using it again. But there's something different with James now. After that initial civil conversation, I've seen troublesome changes in him. For starters, his eyes have this weird, murky tint to them, like the deer in the woods. I've noticed him lying more. Little things. Still, before his usage of the amulet, he was almost pathologically honest. I've noticed James muttering to himself, not when Sarah's around. He's clever enough. And those mutterings mentioned something about the returning to the woods, and that this wasn't meant to happen. I don't know. James feels malicious to me now, where he didn't before, and I'm not sure what to do.